If you're here and you have a Bible, I'd invite you to go ahead and open up to Habakkuk chapter 2. Habakkuk chapter 2, we'll be starting in verse 4. We're going to just kind of pick up where we left off a couple of weeks ago. In Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. I don't have a lot of time to review tonight, so if you're just joining us this evening, you can go online to the church website, fbcnewcastle.com, or you can download our church app, and you can hear the previous three messages through this study. It's going to be a short little study. We'll finish it up before the end of 2019, and so we're in the fourth message here in Habakkuk chapter 2 tonight. Chapter 2, verse 4 is really kind of the theme. It's kind of the key verse in this entire book, and I want to read it to you once again. It says this: "Behold, his soul is puffed up, it is not upright within him." But then this last little phrase, "But the righteous shall live by his faith." And we've been talking about what it looks like to walk in faith, to live in faith, even in the midst of frustration. We've seen Habakkuk bring his frustration to the Lord, his questions to the Lord, as he looks at his world around him and sees all of this wickedness and evil even among the people of God, and he's struggling, and he takes that to God, and he begins to speak with God, and God responds to him, and you get this little phrase, "But the righteous shall live by his faith," which is quoted several times in the New Testament. And it's this idea that no matter what you're facing in life, if you're going to walk righteously, if you're going to walk according to God's plan, you're going to have to walk by faith. But in this verse, Habakkuk is basically summing up all of humanity into two kinds of people. Two kinds of people in the world. The first, he says, is the one whose soul is puffed up. This is the person who is not in right relationship with God. Puffed up here in Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 4 means this person is prideful. Puffed up means pride. There's pride in their life. He goes on and he says, it is not upright within him. His soul is not righteous. He is not upright. So this is the one who is not in right relationship with God. But then it says, the righteous will live by his faith. That's the second kind of person. Two kinds of people. People who trust in themselves. People who are prideful. If you're proud, your desires are not straight, they're crooked. So the first kind of person Habakkuk refers to here is those who are prideful and they're not in right relationship with God. And then you have people who put their trust in God, their faith in God. And so your life, if I could put it just very simply, your life is either bent out to God or it's bent in to yourself. That's your life. If we were to sum up all of mankind, you're either bent out towards God or you're bent in towards yourself. As we go through Habakkuk chapter 2, we see that out of this issue of pride, there are different ways that pride will manifest itself in life. I want you to read on verse 5. He says, "Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects as his own all peoples." Here's what he's saying. Proud people are continually dissatisfied. That's his point in verse 5. Proud people are always unhappy and dissatisfied. I'll prove it to you tonight. We tend to fall into the thinking of our age, the thinking of our world, that stuff leads to satisfaction. We tend to think that the more stuff we have, the more satisfied we'll be. That's why we have so much stuff. Most of us in this room, we could point back to a time in our lives where we thought when we just got to this age and to this level, we'd be satisfied. If we just had this amount of education, if we finished that degree or this degree, we would be satisfied. Or we thought if we just could achieve this amount of income, we'd be satisfied. Or if I could just get that new car, or when I moved into that new house, or when I entered into that relationship. See, we fall prey to the thinking that when we obtain something, tangible stuff in this life, that we will be satisfied. And it doesn't take very long for us to realize The place we live isn't exactly what we wanted. We're not happy. The relationship we're in is not exactly what we wanted. We're still unhappy. The money that we make is not quite enough, and we're still not happy. And this goes on and on in our lives over and over again, and yet we fall prey to it over and over again. We go from a black and white TV to a colored TV that becomes a big screen TV with a remote control and surround sound and a DVD player, and first it's a 40-inch, then it's a 60-inch, next it's an 80-inch. Where does it end, right? How big are our TVs going to get? That's why the world is full of new and improved. And it's why everyone continually trades up, because they're not satisfied with what they already possess. Because here's the secret to life. Are you ready? It's quite simple. Stuff does not lead to satisfaction. It doesn't. It never will. It never has. You ever looked at people who have amazing amounts of money, amazing amounts of success, and yet they're depressed? They turn to alcohol or drugs, and they end up in rehab because their despair is so deep that they're trying to escape from their life of luxury. Have you ever looked at those people and just been perplexed? The reason you have is because still somewhere in your mind there's this lie that stuff satisfies. And it doesn't. It's an illusion. We are a people of stuff. You and I have junk we don't need, bought with money we don't have, to impress people we don't even really like. That's what we do. We fill our lives with this. We're greedy, as Habakkuk says, like the grave. Never get enough. Not enough power, not enough experience, not enough entertainment, not enough fame. Whatever it is that's our thing, there's never enough. We want better, we want newer, we want more. Thinking that if I just get a little more of whatever it is, I'll be satisfied. And yet, we never are. Why? Because stuff comes from earth, and satisfaction comes from God. You see, stuff will never satisfy. Those are two separate things. That's why, if you've ever traveled overseas internationally, one of the most perplexing things is how children in America who can sit in million-dollar homes, play video games on big screen TVs, and they can still be bored, right? Did you know that boredom, that word didn't even exist until fairly recently? Didn't even exist. In the history of the world, we've invented our own word, boredom. So you can travel to other places where they have far less, and another kid can be playing with 2 sticks and a rock and be as happy as can be. I'll never forget one of our kids' first Christmases. I'll never forget, we had bought them some fancy, nice toy that came in this big box. They opened the present, got the toy out of the box, and it wasn't within 5 minutes. You know what they were playing with? The box, right? The box. Because our satisfaction has nothing to do with what's in our hands. It has to do with what's in our hearts. That's why a kid playing with 2 sticks and a rock can be just as happy as a kid who has everything this world can offer, because it really has nothing to do with what's in our hands. It has to do with what's in our hearts. It's like this. Let me give you an illustration. I might have one piece of chocolate, and there might be another guy in this room who buys the whole entire chocolate factory. I get one piece, he has the entire factory. Who's happier? Who's happier? Well, it really depends on which one of us has a mouth. Spiritually speaking, you don't have a mouth unless you know God. You see, you can have everything in the world when it comes to chocolate. If you don't have a mouth, you'll never get to enjoy and taste that chocolate. So who's happier? The one with a mouth. Spiritually speaking, you can have everything in the world, but if you don't have a relationship with God, you can't taste any of it. You can't experience joy in any of it. It will never satisfy you. That's why, you know what? If you have a little and you have God, you can actually be a satisfied person. You can have a lot if you don't know God, and it will never be enough. This is true. It's completely true. And that's what Habakkuk is saying here. Proud people, they're never satisfied. Why? Proud people believe that satisfaction comes when they have enough. And when do they have enough? Never. Never. Basically, if you're a proud person, you are never satisfied until you're God. Until you are God. Until you own everything and everything is at your demand and your disposal. And yet you'll never get there, so you'll always be unhappy. That's what pride does. That's what pride does to the soul. Welcome to America, right? Does this sound like the world in which we live? You bet it does. God talks about the fact that there's consequences for pride. There's consequences for sin. There's consequences for life. And now in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 6, through the rest of the chapter, he is going to give us 5 woes. 5 woes. Let me just go ahead and help you. When God gives a woe, that's a bad thing, okay? Just so you know, this is bad. When God looks at you and he's like, whoa, that's bad, real bad. He gives 5 of them in Habakkuk chapter 2. A woe here in Habakkuk chapter 2 names the sin and the consequence or the judgment for that sin. So we'll jump into these together. Here are sins that offend God. They offend God that greedy, proud, dissatisfied people tend to go towards. We tend to think, we're going to read through this, and we have this tendency to look at it and go, oh, well, we're not like this. We're enlightened. We're evolved. We're unlike these primitive societies that God was speaking to 2,000 plus years ago. You'll find as we read through this that we are no different. We're no different. Look at verse 6. Shall not all these take up their taunt against him with scoffing and riddles for him and say, woe to him who heaps up what is not his own? For how long? And loads himself with pledges. Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those who awake who will make you tremble? Then you will be spoil for them, because you have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the people shall plunder you, for the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. The first woe here in verses 6 through 8, the first woe is to rich people. And 2 things I want to hit on here. First, who are the rich people? Who are the rich people? Everyone kind of tends to fall into this thinking that rich people are the people that make more than them, right? We don't ever really classify ourselves as rich people. Well, the rich people are those who maybe they make a little bit more than me, maybe they make a lot more than me, but not me. Let me tell you really quickly, first thing, this woe is to rich people. It doesn't really matter how much you make. The rich guy's always the guy in our minds that has more than we do. But in the world, if we were to think about this in the world, let's not just compare ourselves to those around us in our church or in our community or in our state or in our nation. Let's think about this in terms of the world. In the world, who are the rich people? And you can respond. We are. We're the rich people. There are 90 countries in the world where the average citizen spends less on all of their goods, food, housing, transportation, everything. They spend less on all of those things than you and I, as the average American citizen, spend on garbage bags to throw out our junk. We are the rich people. So you say, Pastor Nathan, you haven't seen my place. It's not a very nice place. You have a place. For most people in the world, that would be nice. We're doing pretty good. But Pastor Nathan, my car's not very nice. A car? If you've ever been to a third world country, you ever seen an open sewer? You see, we don't even have an understanding of poverty as most of the world does. We are the rich people. And so let me ask you this next question. We're the rich. Is it a sin to be rich? Easy answer, no, of course not. It's not a sin to be rich, unless, of course, you get your money by unrighteous ways. You can draw a line, if you're taking notes, you can draw a line on your piece of paper across 4 quadrants. There are rich righteous people and there are rich unrighteous people. And there are poor righteous people and there are poor unrighteous people. Doesn't matter really about your money, it's about how you get your money and how you use your money. You can take all the rich and poor people that the Bible speaks of. I encourage you to do this sometime as you read through the book of Proverbs. You can put each of them in those 4 categories. 2 are rich, 2 are poor. Some are righteous, some are unrighteous. And it really has nothing to do with how much money they have and everything to do with how they get their money and how they use their money. In the rich category, there are righteous people. They got rich because God blessed them. We tend to try to break things into this prosperity theology and this poverty theology. Oh, if you make a lot of money, it's because God loves you. Or no, it's better to have no money because then you'll be closer to God. Both of those are lies. They're false theologies. You'll see rich people and you'll see poor people in the Bible who love the Lord and are walking with Him. The question is, how did you get your money? Righteous people that are rich got their money by working hard, being honest, investing wisely, spending smartly, not being foolish. If you're cautious, if you're smart, if you work hard, if you spend little and you invest much and you become rich, is that okay? The Bible says absolutely. God gives a man wealth and possessions and adds no trouble to them. It can be a good thing in your life. But what Habakkuk is speaking of here is those who are rich but get their money in an unrighteous way. He lists them here. You can steal your money. You can charge crazy amounts of interest. You can stiff your creditors and not pay off your bills. You can plunder. You could kill people. You could destroy the environment to get yourself rich. So the issue isn't, are you rich? The issue is, how did you get your money? And in the poor column, there are people that are poor and righteous. Some of us don't make as much money as we could because we're honest, because we won't lie, because we won't steal, because we won't stab in the back, we won't gossip. So we keep getting passed up for those promotions because we're not going to compromise our morals just to make more money. And you might be poor for a long time because the system is crooked and broken. Is it a sin to be poor? No. But it is a sin to be poor if you're unrighteous, if you don't show up for work, if you're late, if you're always drunk, if you do a terrible job, if you steal stuff and keep getting fired, if you're just a sluggard. All the young people, we don't use that word very much anymore, but it's in the Bible. Basically, it means you started out as a human being, but you're on the de-evolutionary chart, back to the place where you're a slug, sharing the same line in the food chain. Your couch is shaped like you because you've been there so long. You've sort of molded into it. If you're poor under those circumstances, Paul says if you don't work, you don't eat. So it's not a question of, am I rich or am I poor? The issue is, are you righteous or are you unrighteous? That's the issue here. So many of us want to take money and make it the issue. It's not the issue. He says, woe to those who are the unrighteous rich. Not just the rich, the unrighteous rich. That's the first woe that he gives. Those who get their money by unrighteous means. Then he goes on, the second woe, look at verse 9. It's along the same lines as the first woe. He says, woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples. You have forfeited your life, for the stone will cry out from the wall and the beam from the woodwork respond. What Habakkuk is saying here is this: woe to you who get rich and make lots of money and make a living in sinful ways and then move far, far away to build yourself a nice fat house like a nest far out in the wilderness, away from harm and consequence from your actions. You see, there are people who actually come into certain countries and take advantage of them for wealth. And they won't live in those countries because they don't want to live in the environment that they've created. There are people who will do things in a city to make themselves rich that undermine the value of people's lives and the quality of living in that city. And when they build their house, it's far away from that place where their business is. It's the same reason why thieves and crooks and thugs and criminals tend to commit crimes outside of their neighborhood. Why? Because they don't want to live in a crime-infested place. People don't want to be around crime. They want to profit from it, so they do their work elsewhere. He says, woe to people who conduct themselves in places that aren't their homes in ways that they would never conduct themselves close to home. It's just wrong. So for those of us who own a business or been given responsibility to manage a business, don't ever run your business in a way that you would not run your own home. It's what he's warning them against. God says, at the end of the age, there will be a trial. God will sit on his throne, and we're all going to come before him. And it says that he's going to call in some witnesses. Look at what he says. Look at what he says, verse 11. The stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork respond. He says, I'm going to call in some witnesses. And the rocks that serve as the foundation for your home and the wood out of the ceilings, they're going to come in. And they're going to testify. And I'm going to ask them, where'd you guys come from in that nice house? And they'll say, he stole us. Seriously, that's what he's saying. Everything belongs to God, and God can bring testimony from your house, from your stuff. Can you imagine that? I mean, really, think about this. You stole the money that purchased you that house or that car. You show up before God at the end of the age and you think, nobody saw me. No one knows. He can't bring anyone to testify. And God literally brings in your back porch and says, porch, how'd you get on the house? And the porch says, he ripped people off. He stole the wood. And the nails say, us too. You know, God can do that. That's what he's saying. God knows. He sees. Even if no one else sees, even if no one else knows, don't mess with God. I think that's the moral of that woe. Don't mess with him. He knows, he sees. Verse 12, the third woe. The third woe. Woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity. Behold, is it not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire and nations weary themselves for nothing? Is it possible to build an economy on sin? Is it possible to build a city on sin? I don't want to get political tonight. That's not the point. But if you don't think this is possible, just look around. Just look around. Do you think that there are some towns, some cities, some states, some countries that let bad conduct go on knowing that it is unhealthy simply because it is a source of revenue? Think that happens in our world? You bet it does. There's a big debate. It's been going around for years. Should we legalize drugs? One of the arguments for it is if people are going to do it, we might as well tax it. It's a great argument. So let's make this legal so we can tax them, so we can create a revenue stream. Let's let our people do what's bad for them so that we can profit from it. Sin, you better believe it, church, is big business. Governments do this. The best way to move this kindergarten class to the future is to create a revenue stream off of humanity's propensity for evil. Excellent plan. Let's just tax their iniquity. Genius. Couldn't we come up with a better plan, a plan B? Isn't there another way to do this? That's why towns and states and countries allow things to happen that aren't for the good of people because they're good for taxes and profit. And God says, woe to that. It's wrong. It's not the way that it should work. We'll come back to verse 14 here at the end. Fourth woe comes from verse 15. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk in order to gaze at their nakedness. Now, I'll try to not get too graphic here tonight. We've had a lot of naked passages today. You see, we tend to think we're not like these other societies. We've come so far. We're not so primitive. You don't have to raise your hand tonight, but anybody ever notice maybe in your pre-Jesus days that there's a general equation like human beings plus alcohol equals nudity. I mean, that's our world, right? That's our world. That's what he's saying right here. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but it's sort of like a corresponding scale. I'm sure there's some math whiz that could figure it out for us, how much alcohol it takes to get complete nudity. But that's how our world works. Just watch the commercials for alcohol online. They all hint at this. They all imply this. I buy you alcohol until you're naked, especially young ladies that are here tonight. I'm being dead serious when I say this. Don't mess with alcohol. And guys that want to offer you alcohol, leave them, drop them, don't be around them. Did you know that never in my life, I don't frequent bars or clubs or any of those places, but never in my life have I had a guy offer to buy me a drink. You know why? He doesn't want to see me naked. It's really that simple. Guys don't just like to share their money and give alcohol away. No, they're there for other reasons. I don't drink and I never have, and I would encourage every single person to adopt that same mentality when it comes to alcohol, because in my experience, the only thing that I have seen is it leads to more and more sin. I don't drink, I never have, but I've never had a guy offer me a drink. And there's a reason for that. It's okay that you laughed. I get it, all right? But that's what people do, and that's what he's saying right here. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk in order to gaze at their nakedness. That's the way it goes. And God says 2,600 years later, it's the same. It's the same. Verse 16, look at what happens. He says, you will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. He says, you want a drink? I'll give you a drink. You'll be filled with shame instead of the glory that you're after. Drink and be exposed. Here's a cup. It's not a cup of alcohol. It's a cup of the Lord's right hand coming around at you. Judgment is coming. It will disgrace you, and it will cover your glory. That's the fourth woe. The fifth and the final woe, look at verse 18. Look at verse 18. It's all about idolatry. What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in it. When he starts this section, Habakkuk chapter 2, he's saying there are two kinds of people: prideful people who trust in themselves, and righteous people, humble people who trust in the Lord. All sin comes out of pride, and what pride ultimately leads to is idolatry. Everything he's talked about, all of these woes, they're idolatry. You see, your whole life belongs to God. Your pets, your dollars, your diet, your friendships, your job, everything you have belongs to God. And you either use it in an idolatrous way or a worshipful way. Either it's bent out towards living for God, or it's bent back in living for yourself. It's been said before that the opposite of Christianity is not atheism, it's idolatry. Every single one of us, whether you're a Christian here tonight or not, every single one of us is a worshiper. We're built, we're designed, we're created to worship, and so we do. Some of us do that for a sports team. Some of us do it for a band. Some of us do it for a hobby. Some of us do it for an education, some a relationship, some an experience. We all have something that our intentions and our motives and our desires and our dollars and our energy and our passion gravitates towards. That's why Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Basically, if you follow your schedule and you follow your wallet, you will end up at your God. If you follow your schedule and you follow your wallet, you will end up at your God. A.W. Tozer, the great theologian, says that idolatry is worshiping anything other than God or God as anything less than he's revealed himself to be. Which means it's totally possible. It's totally possible to believe in God, to be spiritual, to even come and worship Jesus, but you may have cut out all the things you don't like about him. You may have diminished God down to a point where he doesn't have judgment for sin, or he doesn't have hell, or there isn't consequences for your actions. You end up with this diminished imaginary sky fairy you call Jesus. And you bow down to him because you've made him into something you're willing to accept. And that's idolatry too. And worship is saying the God who really is, the God that the Bible reveals to us, that's the true God. And all that I have and all that I am is bent towards him because I belong to him. You know, left to ourselves, this is what happens. You and I, we pick absolutely terrible gods. We pick terrible gods. And we read passages like Habakkuk 2 and we say, yes, thank you, Lord, that we are not so primitive as these people who would carve little idols out of wood and stone and then bow down to them and wait for them to save them and make them happy and fix their life. If you've ever been into a Buddhist home or a Hindu home, you'll see a little altar that they've made with their own hands and a little tiny box, and the box usually costs lots of money, and they put money in the box, and they put food around the box and incense around the box, and there's a false god sitting on the box, and they spend time giving their devotion and homage to the box, and we walk in and we see that and we think, how silly. And yet in reality, we're no different. We're no different. We all have idols in our hearts. So what do we do? How do we fix this? Well, I could tell you tonight, and I could tell people, we just need to go home and you just need to be good. You need to be good. You need to try harder. But here's the truth. We don't have the ability to be good. We don't. Left to ourselves, we're just like this passage describes. I could tell people to go home and be good, but you don't have the ability to be good. We need to become new people. You see, the world, it's just a reflection of our hearts. And the world doesn't change until our hearts change. Change begins inside and it works itself out, not outside in. So God has to change us individually from the inside out, save us from sin, from death, from folly, make us new people. That's why Jesus came. It's what we've been singing about all day today. To die for my sin, my past, my present, my future sin, to rise from the grave, to conquer the enemies of sin and death, to make me and you a new creation. That's who God is. In chapter 2, verse 14, I told you we'd come back. Look at what it says. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. You see, that's what God is about in the world. That's what he's after. And it's going to happen. God wants his name and his fame and his reputation to go out across the earth as water covers the land, so that people will know that Jesus is God, that Jesus has come to die for their sin, that Jesus will save them, that they need not to face judgment, that they need not to taste death, that he alone is God. That's God's point. That's his plan. And that's supposed to happen through God's people. God loves us, he saved us, and then he uses us as a conduit through which the good news passes to the world. But many of us fall into the trap of looking at the world and thinking about those people who don't know God, and we just say to hell with them. I want more stuff. And then we end up wondering, why am I not happy? And God, why are you not answering me? Where are you? Why is the world like it is? Just like Habakkuk. God, I thought I was supposed to get more stuff. I thought there was supposed to be more joy. What are you doing? What are you up to? I think God is looking down saying, you're not satisfied because you're looking for satisfaction in all of the wrong places. You're not participating with me in the mission. If you were, you would have joy and satisfaction. If your goal was to have people know me rather than have people worship you, you would have a completely different outlook on your existence. I would submit to you tonight, most of us, we love what God has done for us. And we get frustrated because we wish He would do more for us. And we haven't even stopped to consider the vast number of people in the world that don't even know Him. And what God confronts us in today is the same thing that He's confronting in the day of Habakkuk, and that this life is not about us. It's really about God. And until we accept that, we're never going to be happy. We're never going to be satisfied because we're worshiping ourselves. We are our own idol. And the bottom line is we're not very good gods. And only the real God truly satisfies. Look on at the very last verse. The very last verse. Habakkuk 2, verse 20. But the Lord is in His holy temple. The Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before Him. I love this last verse. God is in His holy temple. God sits in heaven. We're down here on earth. And He says, so let all the earth be what? What? Silent. Silent before Him. He calls Habakkuk to a season of silence. He says, Habakkuk, I've answered your questions. I've come to be with you. I love you. I have a plan. Just trust me. Don't fight me. Don't yell at me. Don't argue. Just trust me. There's nothing left to say. There's nothing left to argue. You see, sometimes we just need to be silent before the Lord. Most of us, we don't need more information. We just need more faith. We don't need more knowledge. We just need to trust what we already know. God is answering Habakkuk and his questions, and He's saying, Habakkuk, just get close to me. He brings it right back to relationship. Just be quiet, be silent, and be with me. And from there, things will move forward and things will work themselves out. And that's what I want to call us to tonight, because in this study, we've talked a lot about frustration. We've talked a lot about our questions. We've talked a lot about how things in our life don't always make sense, and we don't always understand, and we don't always see what God is up to. And here's what I want to call you to tonight. Here's what I want to call you to. Micah's going to come, and he's going to play and quietly sing over us. But I want to just call us to this right here, verse 20. But the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before Him. I want to call you, just as we close tonight, to a time just to meditate, a time to confess, a time for thinking, contemplation, reorientation, a time to just get silent before the Lord and just listen. Just listen to Him. Maybe it's you look back over Habakkuk chapter 2 and you read and you say, where am I falling short? Where are the idols in my life? And you just listen for God to speak. I'm convinced that we don't take enough time in our day-to-day lives to just stop and to just listen for the Lord.